The wind howled across the cliffs, carrying with it the chill of the sea below. Atop the jagged rock, the castle loomed like a dark sentinel, its towers stretching toward a sky heavy with storm clouds. Few dared approach it, for whispers traveled faster than the road, and tales of the Lord within were enough to turn even the bravest feet away. They said he was a man of great power, but cruel beyond measure. They spoke of shadows that moved of their own will and voices that echoed in empty halls. And they said that every soul who entered the castle, servants, messengers, even wandering merchants, vanished, fled, or never returned the same. Yet now, a message had traveled across the kingdom. The Lord desired a maid. The villagers laughed at the notion. "Fools," they muttered. "All who enter his halls are lost. No one can serve him." Despite the warnings, a young woman named Ilara walked calmly along the winding road that led to the castle. She was small in stature, but carried herself with a quiet confidence. Her dark hair flowed behind her like a river in the wind, and her eyes, sharp and curious, did not shy from the sight of the looming fortress. She had heard the rumors, yes, but she did not fear them, not fully. Fear had a way of clouding judgment, of stopping hearts before they had a chance to beat. She had faced hardships in her own life, losses and struggles that had taught her the strength in steady resolve. Whatever lay inside that castle, she would meet it with clear eyes and an unshaken heart. The great doors of the castle groaned as she pushed them open. Dust swirled in the shafts of dim light that fell through tall, narrow windows. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, their colors dulled by years of neglect. The air was thick and cold, carrying a faint scent of candle wax and something else, something old, like the castle itself was breathing a memory of centuries past. She stepped inside cautiously, her boots echoing on the stone floor. Immediately she felt it, the weight of the castle, a presence that seemed alive. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, and for a moment she imagined them watching her, waiting. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to turn away and leave this place to the legends and the lonely winds. But she did not. Her first task was simple enough: cleaning the great hall. The room was enormous, its vaulted ceilings stretching beyond sight. Dust and cobwebs clung to every surface. As she worked, she sensed a presence behind her, silent and commanding. She turned quickly, expecting perhaps a servant or a shadow of wind, but the hall remained empty, the only sound the whisper of her own movements. Then, as if from nowhere, a voice called softly, low and measured. "Who are you?" Ilara froze. The voice was deep, smooth, yet carried a hint of something brittle beneath the surface, like ice cracking over dark water. "I am Ilara," she answered, steady, though her pulse quickened. "I have come to serve as you requested." A figure appeared at the far end of the hall. He was tall, broader than any man she had seen, with dark hair that fell around a face pale and sharp as a winter moon. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held a weight that seemed to press against her chest. There was a stillness about him, a presence that demanded attention without a word, and yet there was something else, a flicker of sorrow. "You are the first not to flee," he said after a long pause. "Why do you remain?" Ilara met his gaze evenly. "Because I do not run from what I do not yet understand." He studied her, as if trying to measure her courage, her spirit, her truth. The silence between them stretched long, almost unbearable, until he finally nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Very well," he said, turning away. "See that the hall is ready for the evening, and be careful where you step. The castle does not forgive mistakes easily." Ilara bent back to her work, but she felt his eyes lingering on her long after he had vanished down a distant corridor. Shadows seemed to twist and curl around the corners of the room, but she did not flinch. There was fear, yes, but also something like wonder, a fascination that kept her rooted in place. Days passed in a rhythm both harsh and strangely comforting. She swept the halls, tended the kitchens, and polished the mirrors that reflected not just her own image, but fleeting glimpses of things that might or might not be there. Some nights, she thought she saw figures moving in the darkened corridors, figures that vanished when she approached. Sometimes the walls themselves seemed to sigh, heavy with the weight of memory. Yet in all of it, the Lord remained an enigma. He appeared often but without ceremony, observing her work, offering little guidance but making no criticism. His presence was demanding, but there was no cruelty in it, only a power tempered by distance, as if he did not fully know how to inhabit the world outside his own pain. One evening, she found him standing at a window in the high tower, gazing out over the cliffs and the endless ocean beyond. The wind tossed his hair, and the candlelight cast long, sharp shadows across his face. "You work diligently," he said without turning. "Few have the patience or courage for this place. Most flee at the first sign of discomfort. You are different." Alara wiped her hands on her apron, meeting his eyes. "I do not know if I am brave. I only know that running accomplishes nothing." He was silent for a long moment. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Many cannot see the difference between courage and stubbornness. Some pay a heavy price for it." "I can pay no more than my own," she said softly, "and I am willing to see what lies here. If the castle wants to teach me something, I will learn." There was a shift then, subtle but undeniable. The tension in his shoulders eased, and a shadow of a smile, or was it relief, passed across his features. But the moment was broken by a sudden tremor in the air. A whisper, barely audible, drifted from the far end of the hall. Alara froze, straining to hear. The voice was low, a ghostly echo that seemed older than the stones themselves. "Leave, before it claims you." Her heart beat fast, yet she did not move. The Lord appeared beside her, moving silently as a shadow himself. He laid a hand lightly on her shoulder, not in warning, but in steadiness. "Do you hear it?" she asked, her voice low. "I do," he said. "It is part of the castle. It tests those who enter." Alara swallowed. "Then I will not fail it." He studied her for a long moment. His eyes softened. And for the first time, she saw not the Lord of Shadows, but a man trapped in a place he did not choose, carrying a burden he could not lay down. "You are foolish," he said finally. "And perhaps that is why you survive here." The days turned into nights, and nights into days. Alara learned the rhythms of the castle, the creak of the old beams, the sigh of the stones in winter cold, the flicker of lights that sometimes moved on their own. She saw the ghosts of memories etched into walls, caught between time and shadow, but she faced them with steady courage. And the Lord, once distant and unreadable, began to change. Small gestures, subtle acknowledgments, a word of rare praise. He seemed drawn to her steadiness, to her refusal to be cowed by the fear that haunted the castle. Yet he remained distant in ways she could not yet understand. A fortress within the fortress. One night, as lightning cracked across the sky and the wind shook the castle, she was called to the great hall. Torches flickered violently, casting shadows that danced like living things across the walls. The Lord stood at the center, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. "You should leave," he said quietly, though the storm seemed to echo his warning. "No mortal should linger here. This castle is not kind to those who stay too long." "I will not," she said, stepping closer. "Not while you suffer alone. Not while the castle itself cries for understanding." The storm rattled the windows, and for a heartbeat, the hall seemed to breathe with them. Shadows gathered and twisted, as if the castle itself were alive, testing the resolve of both maid and master. The Lord's hand twitched. as though he longed to reach for her but feared the consequences. The tension between them was a living thing, heavy and unspoken. You should not have come here," he said finally, his voice a mixture of command and plea. "I should have," she replied softly, "for if no one dares to see the truth, the darkness will never be understood, and perhaps it can never be healed." He stared at her, his storm-gray eyes searching hers. Then, as if resigned to something he could not change, he nodded once. A crack of thunder shook the hall, and in that moment, the shadows seemed to lean closer, almost expectant, as if the castle itself held its breath. Ilara felt a shiver of anticipation, of fear, and of something else. A spark of hope, fragile yet undeniable. She knew this was only the beginning. The castle's secrets were many, and the Lord's heart even more hidden. But she had chosen to stay. And in doing so, she had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. The wind howled again outside, carrying the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs. And somewhere in the darkness, the castle whispered, waiting for the story to unfold. The days after her first night in the Great Hall were unlike anything Ilara had expected. The castle, though still foreboding, seemed to respond to her presence, almost as if it were watching her, testing her. Shadows shifted at the corners of her vision, but she no longer flinched. She had learned to move carefully, to read the whispers of the stones and the sighs of the corridors. The Lord, for his part, remained as enigmatic as ever. He appeared without warning, sometimes at the top of the grand staircase, sometimes in the library, where rows of dusty tomes awaited his inspection. He offered little conversation, but his eyes lingered on her work, measuring more than her skill. There was a curiosity there, a subtle fascination that neither of them fully acknowledged. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs and the horizon burned orange and red, Ilara found herself drawn to the northern tower. She had been curious about the room at the top for days. The door was old and carved with strange runes that seemed to shift under her gaze. It called to her, whispering secrets she could not yet understand. When she opened it, she found a study, untouched by dust and decay. Shelves lined with books of strange languages and peculiar symbols stretched from floor to ceiling. A single desk sat in the center, illuminated by the dim light of a lantern. On it lay an open journal, its pages filled with meticulous writing. As she bent over to examine it, the Lord's voice startled her. "You should not be here," he said, though his tone lacked anger. It was more a statement of fact than a command. "I heard the room," Ilara said simply. "It calls to me. I do not understand why, but I feel I must see." He studied her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment the storm-gray eyes softened, and a shadow of something unspoken passed across his face. "Many have tried to read those pages," he said quietly. "Few have returned without fear. The knowledge inside, it is not kind to those unprepared." "I am not afraid," she said, though her voice held a tremor. "I am willing to learn." He stepped closer, and the shadows of the room seemed to bend around him. "You are brave, or foolish. Perhaps both. But you have a steadiness I have not seen in centuries." Ilara opened the journal carefully. The writing was dense, speaking of the castle's history, of curses placed and promises broken. She felt the weight of it, as though the words themselves carried a sorrow that clung to her chest. The Lord remained silent, watching her, but she sensed that he was both protector and prisoner here. The castle had not been kind to him either. Its darkness had grown with time, feeding on isolation and fear, twisting even his heart. Over the next days, Ilara's understanding of the castle deepened. She discovered hidden chambers, halls that seemed to shift when unobserved. and mirrors that reflected not only her image, but fleeting glimpses of the past, visions of the Lord as a young man, surrounded by laughter and light before the shadows claimed him. It was during one of these explorations that she first encountered the true nature of the curse. In the eastern wing, a mirror glimmered strangely. When she looked into it, she saw herself, not as she was, but as the castle perceived her, small, brave, yet fragile, surrounded by shadows that whispered doubts and fears. She felt the pull of the mirror, a subtle pressure that seemed to reach into her mind. "You see it," the Lord said, appearing silently behind her. "The castle shows you what it believes you carry inside." "I feel it," she admitted, her fingers brushing the cool surface. "It is heavy, like it knows my fears before I do." "Most would have fled," he said, voice low, almost a confession. "Most cannot face themselves here, let alone the darkness that lingers in these walls." Ilara turned to him, curiosity and concern mingling in her eyes. "And you? Do you face it, or does it bind you?" His gaze darkened. "It has bound me for longer than I can remember. I have grown used to the weight, but I am not free." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them was charged, thick with unspoken truths. Ilara realized that his power, his command, was only part of him. The other part, the part the castle had claimed, was vulnerable, lonely, and aching for understanding. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the castle groaned with the weight of storms, the Lord summoned her to the great hall. Torches flickered, casting shadows that writhed across the walls like living things. He stood at the center, hands clasped behind him, the same calm authority he always held, yet something trembled beneath it. "Do you understand what it means to stay here?" he asked. "This place tests more than courage. It tests the soul. Many have come before you, and many have failed." "I understand," Ilara said, her voice steady. "I do not pretend to be unafraid, but I do not turn away from the truth I see. I face it because I must." He studied her for a long moment. "You are different," he said finally. "Different from those who flee. But do you know what that difference may cost you?" "I will pay it," she said, "if it means learning the truth, and perhaps helping you if I can." The Lord's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, and he nodded once. "Then we shall see." It was then that the first real danger of the castle presented itself. A corridor she had passed countless times before now appeared different. Shadows moved more sharply, the walls themselves seeming to breathe. A low whispering echoed through the stone, growing louder with every step she took. The Lord appeared beside her, silent and commanding, yet there was tension in his posture. "Do not falter," he warned. "The castle is alive here. It tests the mind, the heart, and the courage of anyone who walks these halls." Ilara felt a chill, but she did not move back. Together, they stepped into the corridor, and the whispers intensified. Shapes formed in the darkness, figures indistinct, but with eyes that gleamed and hands that reached. Fear clawed at her chest, but she held her ground. The Lord raised a hand, and the shadows recoiled slightly as if aware of his presence. "Do not let them see you falter," he said, voice steady, though there was strain beneath it. "They feed on doubt and despair." Ilara nodded, gripping the edge of her apron. She felt the weight of every story she had ever heard about the castle, about those who entered and never returned. Yet she moved forward, step by step, her courage a beacon in the dark. At the corridor's end, a door appeared, glowing faintly with a strange, ethereal light. Behind it, the whispering ceased, replaced by a low hum that seemed to resonate within her very bones. The Lord turned to her, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "What lies behind this door has not been seen by mortal eyes for centuries," he said. "It is a truth that could shatter or redeem, depending on who faces it." Ilara took a deep breath. "Then we face it together," she said. He studied her for a long moment. Finally, he nodded, and together they pushed the door open. Inside was a room unlike any she had seen. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not just her image, but visions of the past and possible futures. Shadows moved independently of any light, and the air thrummed with the weight of centuries. A figure appeared in the center of the room, a phantom of the Lord as a young man, full of light and life, smiling at something long lost. The vision flickered and twisted, the shadows of the present bleeding into it. Ilara felt a wave of empathy and sorrow. She realized that the Lord's isolation, his coldness, his fearsome reputation, all of it had roots in a tragedy so deep that even the castle itself mourned it. The Lord stood beside her, his hand close, but not touching hers. "This is my past," he said quietly. "The curse, the isolation, it all began here. Few can face it and remain themselves. Fewer still can face it with courage." "I will not turn away," she said. "Not from you, not from this. I will stay, even if it frightens me. Perhaps that is how the castle will let us both live fully again." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, his expression softened completely. The shadows around him seemed to recede, as if acknowledging her bravery and the connection they had forged. The storm outside continued, wind and lightning lashing the cliffs, yet inside the room there was a fragile calm. They stood together, facing the echoes of the past, and for the first time, the castle did not feel entirely hostile. Yet in the deepest shadow of the room, a faint whisper lingered, almost imperceptible, carrying a warning. Not all darkness can be tamed, and not all truths are safe. Ilara shivered, but she did not retreat. She knew that the challenges ahead would be greater, the truths harder to face. But she also knew that she had already crossed a threshold. The Lord, the castle, and the curse itself all had begun to change, if only slightly, because she had chosen to stand. The castle seemed to hold its breath. The storm outside had grown fiercer, wind howling against the stone walls and rain hammering the windows with relentless force. Shadows twisted in corners and along the corridors, but inside, Ilara moved with steady resolve. The events of the past days had sharpened her senses, trained her courage, and deepened her understanding of the Lord and the castle he inhabited. The Lord, the man of storm-gray eyes and commanding presence, walked beside her. There was a tension in his posture that betrayed both authority and uncertainty. He had shown her glimpses of his past, allowed her to see the weight of the curse he bore, yet even now, he did not fully reveal himself. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly, his voice low but firm. "Once we enter the heart of the castle, there is no turning back. It will demand everything of us." Ilara met his gaze without hesitation. "I am certain," she said. "I will not run, not from you, not from this castle, not from what is true." He studied her for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes flickering with an emotion she could not name. Then he nodded, and together they pressed forward. The corridor ahead was darker than any they had encountered. The torches on the walls flickered wildly, casting moving shadows that seemed almost alive. The air smelled of old stone and cold mist, and the whispering that had accompanied her since her arrival grew louder, more insistent. "You must not falter," the Lord said, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. It was not a command, but a gesture of trust and support. "The castle tests not just courage but the heart. It will feed on doubt, on fear, on regret. Keep your mind clear." Ilara nodded. "I understand." At the end of the corridor, a massive door appeared. It was carved with intricate runes that pulsed faintly with a light that seemed to come from within the stone. The moment they approached, the shadows shifted, forming shapes that whispered threats and promises. The Lord placed his hand on the door, and for the first time, Alara saw the hesitation in him. "This is it," he said quietly, "the heart of the castle, the source of the curse." Alara's pulse quickened, but she did not step back. She reached for his hand, and he allowed her to hold it. The touch was brief, yet it carried a connection stronger than any words. Together, they pushed the door open. Inside was a chamber unlike any other. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not only the room, but fragments of memory, emotion, and possibility. At the center stood a pedestal, and on it lay a small, dark crystal that seemed to pulse with life. The air hummed with power, and the shadows around them seemed to writhe in anticipation. The Lord stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the crystal. "This is the source," he whispered. "The curse began here. It feeds on isolation, on fear, on sorrow. It has grown with me, twisted me into what I have become." Alara stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we face it together," she said softly. "Whatever it asks, we will endure it, not as master and maid, but as two who stand together." He looked at her, a mixture of surprise and something softer, gratitude perhaps, or awe. "You are extraordinary," he said. "No one has ever stayed. No one has ever dared to reach this far." The shadows began to gather around them, thickening, whispering, testing. Shapes formed that resembled past failures, lost friends, and moments of weakness. The castle seemed alive, judging them, pressing against their resolve. "Do not give in," Alara said firmly. "We are stronger together." The Lord nodded, and together they approached the crystal. As his fingers touched it, a wave of darkness surged outward, attempting to engulf them both. Fear, sorrow, and isolation pressed against their minds, threatening to break their courage. But Alara held his hand, and in that connection, they found strength. "You are not alone," she said. "I am here, and I will not leave." The darkness faltered, and for the first time, the crystal pulsed with a light that was not only cold and harsh, but warm and bright. The shadows recoiled, writhing as if in pain, and the whispering faded to a low hum. The Lord's eyes were wide with awe and disbelief. I never thought," he began, voice shaking. "I never thought it could be broken." Alara smiled gently. "Courage, truth, and trust. Sometimes that is stronger than any curse." As the crystal's light grew, the mirrors around them reflected not despair, but possibility. They saw visions of the castle alive with warmth, with light, with laughter. They saw themselves walking through the halls, not as master and maid, but as equals, companions, perhaps even friends. The Lord took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he released the crystal. The shadows receded completely, and the air felt lighter, as if the castle itself exhaled. For the first time in centuries, there was stillness, and in that stillness, hope. He turned to Alara, his expression unguarded, raw with emotion. You saved me," he said, voice breaking. "I do not know how to thank you. No one has ever seen me, truly seen me, and still stayed." Alara reached for his hand again, holding it firmly. "You do not need to thank me. You only need to be willing to live again, to let the darkness go." The Lord's eyes softened, and he allowed himself to smile, a rare, genuine smile that lit his features. I will try," he said quietly. "I will try because of you." For a moment they stood in silence, the storm outside forgotten, the castle at peace. The connection between them, forged through courage, fear, and shared vulnerability, was stronger than any magic, any curse. Then a sound echoed through the chamber, a soft, almost imperceptible hum, different from the shadows they had faced before. It was not threatening, but alive, as if the castle itself were acknowledging their victory. "You have changed more than me," the Lord said, his voice low. "You have changed the castle. Perhaps it can be a home again because of you." Ilara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Then we will make it so," she said. "Together." The Lord looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time there was no distance, no command, no shadow of fear, only recognition and a fragile, hopeful connection. Over the next days, the castle slowly shifted. Shadows retreated from the corners, light seemed to linger longer in the halls, and the air felt less oppressive. The Lord moved with more ease, less burdened by the weight of isolation. And always Ilara was there, steady, compassionate, and unafraid. They explored the castle together, opening rooms that had remained closed for centuries, restoring what had been neglected, and discovering histories long hidden. The mirrors no longer reflected only fear and sorrow. They showed hope, resilience, and the possibility of joy. The villagers, who had long whispered of the cursed lord and his haunted castle, began to notice changes. Fewer screams were heard at night, fewer shadows were seen moving along the walls. Rumors shifted, slowly, from fear to curiosity, and sometimes even admiration. One evening, as they stood on the highest tower, looking out over the cliffs and the endless sea, the Lord turned to Ilara. The wind tugged at their cloaks, the sun dipped low, and the world seemed to pause. "I never believed anyone could stand here with me," he said softly. "And yet, you have. You have faced the darkness, and you have brought light where I thought only shadow could exist." Ilara reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "I did not do it alone," she said. "You allowed me to stay. You allowed me to see the truth. That is what made it possible." He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then, we face whatever comes next. Together." As they stood there, the storm of the past finally behind them, there was a fragile peace. The curse was broken, yet the castle and its lord remained alive with history, memory, and the weight of centuries. But now there was also hope, trust, and a bond forged in courage and compassion. The shadows of the castle no longer whispered threats. They lingered but softly, as if respecting the bravery and love that had entered the halls. And in the quiet of the night, amidst flickering torches and ancient stone, the Lord and the maid, no longer merely master and servant, stood together, ready to face the world, the castle, and themselves. In the distance, the faint echo of the ocean met the cliffs, a rhythm steady and eternal. And in that rhythm, they found a reflection of what they had built together, strength born of courage, connection born of trust, and the quiet, enduring magic of a heart open to hope. The castle, once a place of fear, now seemed alive in a different way, not with curses or shadows, but with possibility and the promise of new beginnings. End of Part 3. Emotional close. The Lord turned to Ilara, his hand still holding hers. "You came when all others fled. You stayed when I could not ask, and because of that, I am free." Ilara smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. "And because of you, the castle is free too." The storm outside had passed. The wind now carried only the salt of the sea and the whisper of future days. They looked out over the cliffs together, two figures standing against centuries of shadow. And in that quiet moment, both understood that fear no longer ruled them. Only courage, connection, and the quiet, enduring promise of trust remained. The castle had endured centuries of darkness, but now, for the first time in living memory, it would endure light, and together they would face whatever the future held.